International Student Services Office, and she's the one who gave you that wonderful paperwork you needed for your visa. She's going to talk to you a little bit about the different requirements for your visa, or how to handle life as an international student.
好，今天这个是国际办公室学生办公室的主任，他会你们的 I-20 form 不是 I-20，你们所有的那种关于要办签证的手续都是要经过他。今天他特别要来跟你们谈一下，作为一个外国学生在美国的生活还有各方面的需要。
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here today, and I'm so happy to meet you. I've seen your names as I did your visa papers, but it's happy to see faces to go with the names.
谢谢你们哈，我今天很高兴跟大家来见面。我就已经见过你们的名字，因为我要替你们准备办签证的那所有的材料。但是今天能够见到脸，当然就更高兴。
So welcome to Eastern.
欢迎你们来到东方大学。
I am going to talk a little bit about the student visa that you have. You may also have a visa like this if you come back to study in the U.S.
我今天要谈一下你们所拿的这个学生签证的情况。如果你们将来打算再重新回到美国读书，还有那种学生签证是怎么回事？
Some of what I say will matter right now for a short time that you're here, but some of it will be helpful to know in case you come to study the university later, or in the future, or you stay to study later, or something like that.
我现在谈的有些是跟你今天跟你现在在美国这一段时间有很好的帮助，有些呢对于你将来如果你还想重新回到美国读书也会有帮助。
So, let me go over some of the things that I want to tell you. First of all, one of the reasons you're here is that as a university, we really like exchange programs. We believe that we learn from each other.
第一个原因，你们能够来到东方大学，是因为我们相信，你们来到这里呢，我们可以彼此来学习。
I have already learned from my friend Anna, whose Chinese name is Ping, and I wore this today in honor of my friend Ping.
我就已经从 Anna 身上已经学到，因为她的中文名字是平，所以我今天戴的这个项链就是写的是个平字。
So I learned things about China from my friend Ping, and she of course knows already things about the U.S.
我从我的朋友平身上学到了很多关于中国的情况，当然她也对美国非常了解。
So we have a lot to learn from each other. You can learn from American students, and American students can learn from you.
所以我们彼此可以学习很多，你可以从美国学生学到一些东西，美国学生可以从你身上学到一些东西。
I know that they've talked about some of the rules about living on this campus, and just to let you know, we don't mean to be restrictive, but we do things that we think are good for everyone. We consider this to be a community of people, and we respect everybody in our community.
我们知道你刚才已经听到了一些规矩，在校园中间的某些规矩。我想让大家知道，这些规矩不是为了限制你，而是因为我们大家是住在一个社区、一个团体之中。这样的规矩呢，可以使得我们彼此都能得到益处。
Eastern is a Christian university. You do not have to be a Christian to come to Eastern. We have students who may be Buddhists or other types of religious faiths. But you will notice that certain things happen on this campus because there's a Christian faith in this campus.
东方大学是一个基督教大学，你没必要成为一个基督徒才能进到这个学校。你会发现这个学校还有其他宗教的，有其他宗教背景的学生，或者佛教徒或者其他宗教背景。但是不过你逐渐就会发现，东方大学它要做某些事情，是因为他们是基督教大学。
So you may notice as a faculty member might pray, or they might refer to something in the Christian faith. And it's okay if you're not Christian, that's all right. You don't have to be here. You're welcome here. We welcome the diversity of everyone on this campus.
你可能会觉得这边老师们有的时候他们会祷告，他们会在上课之前祷告，他们会谈一些基督教的信仰方面的这样的情况。但是没有关系，你自己虽然不是基督徒，因为我们这个校园是欢迎大家各种各样不同背景的人来到我们中间。
But please feel free to ask if you have questions about. Because sometimes Americans do things not because of religion. Maybe there are other reasons why Americans do things, and you just want to know why. So feel free to ask.
如果你有问题，就请你一定要问哈，一定要非常自然、非常 自由大胆的问，因为美国人有很多人他做一些事情，不见得是因为宗教背景的原因，可能是因为其他的原因，所以你要有机会就尽量有什么疑问一定要问。
And I think that we've already talked to you about security on campus. Our staff, personnel, the resident staff are all trained to deal with emergencies. I believe you have phone numbers. And I don't know if anyone showed them how to access the campus-wide alert system on cell phones, but they could enter their cell phone if they want to receive any alerts.
OK， 所以你刚才已经知道在校园安全措施，还有这学校宿舍那些辅导们，他们都是专门被训练，能够在紧急情况下可以来帮助你。他刚才他想讲的呢，因为你们还不知道，在网站上有一个很重要的一个在这个校园中间有很重要的办法，如果有紧急状况的时候，学生的你的手机就会被显示，就会马上告诉你学校现在有紧急状况，你就可以马上做好准备。
Okay, so now let's move to the next slide.
我们再往
I'm
下
going to talk about the visa that you have, which we call an exchange visitor visa,
我们让你知道你的签证就是交换学者的那个签证，所以叫 J1。
There's another type of student visa called an F1.
还有另外一个学生的签证叫 F1 签证。
You're on J1 because it's an exchange program. You come from another school and you come to know our school. But you can study in the U.S. on either one of these visas.
所以你的签证是 J1，因为呢你是一个交换的这样的一个方法，所以你们来到我们学校可以学习我们的情况，我们也可以到你们学校学习你们学校的情况。你在美国如果是做学生读书，还可以用 F1 的签证。
Now, some of the documents that you need to be aware of when you are in another country, what do you need to know about your visa documents?
有些证件呢，其他证件，如果你在一个国家，你应该知道你的所有的证件的情况。
This summer, you're here a short time, so there's not a lot to remember. But if you do come back to study in the U.S. for a longer period of time, you will need to know these things.
今年夏天，因为你们在这边时间短，所以你们就不需要记着太多的事情。如果以后你们想再来美国读比较长时间的过来读书，你们就要知道更多了。
So one of the things in your passport is a visa.
在你的护照中间，一个是签证。
That's probably a sticker that was stuck inside, and it somewhere says J1, United States of America. It's your visa.
可能是印的一个章子，上面在哪个地方会写一个 J1， 指的在美国哈。
That is actually needed to come inside the U.S. That's like an entry ticket to get in.
所以这个签证呢，实际上是你需要有这个签证才能进入美国，好像一张入门票一样。
What gives you permission to walk around inside the U.S. is another document called an I-94.
如果你想在美国走来走去，你需要另外一个证件，那个就是 I-94表。
That is a little white card that they stuck in your passport when you came here.
就是当你入境的时候，就有一个白色的卡，它放在你的护照里边。
They gave it to you on the airplane, and you filled it in, and then they took a part of it and gave you a part of it.
当你坐飞机的时候，他就已经发给你，让你把它填好。然后当你入关，他就给你撕掉一部分，另外那个小的他就给你放在护照上。
If you came on a tourist visa temporarily, they would stamp a date on there, and you'd be told you're allowed to be here until that date, and then you have to go home.
如果是个旅游签证，它上面就会给你专门盖一个章子，说你会到某年某月某日，你会允许你待到那个时间。如果那个时间到了，你就必须回家。
For a J1 or an F1 visa, they write this.
如果是 J1 还有 F1 的这个签证呢，它就会写成一个 D/S D， 然后一个斜杠，然后 S。
There's not a date that you have to leave by. What this means is the duration of your status.
它这个没有给你写具体的日子，你究竟哪天必须离开美国？它那个意思呢，它就是说你的身份允许你待多久你就待多久。
And the status is for as long as your program is. If you're here for a summer program, your status is good for the length of your summer program. If you come for 4 years to go for a bachelor's degree, it's good for 4 years to do a bachelor's degree.
所以你的身份呢，就跟你来这个地方你来学习目的有关系。比如说你是夏天的这种节目这种情况，那可能就是你完成了，那你就回去。如果你来这边要读4年大学，可能就是4年之后你就要离开。 所以呢是不一样的。
And then there are rules about if you start at one school and then you change to another school. There are things that we can do to move around, and you need people like me who know how to do those things.
你还有一些情况，如果你在读书的这个过程之中，你换了一个学校，中间就会有一些规定，究竟应该怎么来处理这样的事情。如果你想要处理这样的事情，你就必须要有一个专业的人员，就像 Kathy 这种专业的人员可以来帮助你。
So every university, every college has someone who's in charge of international student services, and they know how to run the visas, how to move people from one school to another. If somebody finishes a bachelor's degree, does a master's degree, all of this can be done because there are people who know how to move them.
每一个学校基本上都会有国际学生服务的这样的一个机构，然后这个中间这些来管这些事的人，他就专门让学生，如果他们需要，他们本科读完了需要读研究生，怎么把它换过去，还有这各方面的需要，他们就会来处理。
The other paper that you have that's very important is called the DS 2019, which is something that we sent you from Eastern University.
还有一个特别重要的一个文件就是 DS 2019，这个是跟你自己所做的事情有特别有关，比如东方大学，这是东方大学直接送给你们的。
I think this stands for Department of State because it's the Department of State that lets you come into our country. And then we tell them what you're coming for. When we put all this information into the database, we tell them you're coming for a specific program.
这个 DS 大概代表是国务院的意思，然后下面这个上面就必须你在那个表填的时候必须填你们来这边究竟是要干什么，所以东方大学要填上去你们具体的目的何在。
So this summer program is to learn some English and learn how to go to, if you would go to school in the U.S., some of the things you need to know.
这个夏天的节目，这个夏天的项目，你们来呢是让你们学习英语，而且帮助你们学习。如果你要想在美国读书，下面以后要如何做？
So we're preparing you, hopefully, to be able to study in the future.
我们是想来帮助你们，准备你们将来还可以继续读。
So you need to know the expiration dates on these to make sure that things don't expire, like your passport, make sure that it doesn't expire. You need to renew it.
你要知道你的所有的这些证件什么时候是可能会过期，比如说护照什么时候要过期，你要知道。
And the time that you're given depends on what the diplomatic agreement is between the U.S. and your country. So the U.S. and China have agreed on how long they will give you for these things. It's different than what the U.S. and India has decided that they would do, or the U.S. and Mexico would do for these things.
然后美国跟中国可能规定，它有特别的规定，你的护照必须保持在多长时间不要过期，你就可以使用，你就可以这样子回到中国，或者是来到美国。每个国家之间的规定不同，比如说美国跟印度可能就跟美国跟中国的不一样。好。
So the Department of State may give a visa to a person from West Africa for only 1 year, and then from India for, you get 5 years? And India might get 5 years, and you say, why? Why is that?
好，这个国务院可能是给从西非来的学生，可能只给他签证是一年的时间，但是给从印度来的可能是5年的时间。你可能觉得这是为什么？
And it's simply because of some diplomatic agreement between the U.S. and the other country.
这主要就是这其实非常简单，就是因为美国跟其他国家的这种外交上的自己的协议。
The good thing is the visa is needed when you come in, but as long as you have that I-94, you can stay even if your visa expires.
好消息是这个签证啊，只是说让你帮助你进入美国，你真正能在美国待多久是你那个白色的 I-94表。
You'd only need to renew the visa if you went home and then you needed to come back. And you usually can renew the visa.
当你回去之后，你很有可能要重新办签证，然后才能回来。
So the only way really that you violate your visa, because you don't, if it expires, that doesn't matter. But there are 2 things that you could do that would hurt your visa.
一般来讲，你不会有违反你签证的这种规定的，但是在某些情况下，你很有可能你做了签证，它不允许你做的事情。
The U.S. government says if we give you a student visa, we expect you to be a full-time student. So if you stopped enrolling full-time in classes, that would hurt your visa.
在美国政府，如果他给你一个学生签证，那他对你的期待是你必须全时间做全时间的学生。 如果你没有做全时间的学生，没有学满课，那可能就是你的签证你就违反了这种规定。
And the US government says, we gave you a visa to be a student, not to come here to work. So if you worked illegally, that would cancel your visa as well.
如果美国政府他说我给你学生签证是让你来读书，不能工作。如果你要是自己工作，非法工作，你的签证就会失效。
There are two things a student is allowed to do to work. One is to work on a campus job.
有2件事情学生可以工作，一个是在校园里面工作。
I believe Vivian is working on a campus job as a helper.
我知道 Vivian 是在校园里边这样工作，可以帮助这样的一个节目，这样的一个。
And Sol is working because she's getting paid to help with the camera.
是在这边工作，因为他是专门来照相的，所以他能够得
Those
到
kinds of jobs you're allowed to do.
这种工作你可以做。
And you're allowed to do what we call an internship. If you're studying business and in your junior year you go out to work in a company, it's part of your study to do an internship.
你也可以做实习，比如说你要是3年级、4年级或者几年级，如果你需要实习，你要是学商业、学各方面专业，那你也可以这样子去工作，到其他公司里边，到其他地方工作。
There are some times when a student falls out of status because let's say they enrolled full-time in classes and then something went wrong and they dropped a class and suddenly they're not full-time, they just hurt their visa. So what do they do?
所以也有一些情况，一些学生就把自己的签证一下违反，签证规定违反了，他的身份就会受到损失，就会错掉。那就比如说他选的本来是全时间的学生，本来是上课学分选得满满的，可是中间出现了一些事情，他有些课他就必须就是说不要上了，就是说他不想上那些课了，然后学分一下就不够了，所以这就是一个问题。那他应该怎么办呢？
So there are some times when you can get back into your visa status. You have to pay some money and file an application, but sometimes you can get back into your visa status.
有些时候你要是比如说花点钱，你重新办一些事情，你可以重新再回到学生签证这样的一个机会上。
And sometimes you need to go home and come back, and that helps you get back into status.
有些时候你必须回去之后，然后重新办签证，重新回来。
But if you're here after your visa has been out of status, they start counting the days that you were here without a proper status.
如果你的学生身份这个签证你把它违反之后，你就继续待在美国，他们就开始数你在美国这种非法居留的这个时间。
So if you're here a long time, you're accruing or they're counting days of illegal presence, and they will hold that against you. The more days that you have, the more they will hold that against you for the future.
如果你要是在身份错掉之后，身份已经失效之后，你继续待在美国，他们就按你在美国的这个天数来帮你数，让你数，将来他就会用这种办法来反对你，可能就会对你别的会有影响。
I can tell you an example of a student who was nice, but he decided he should work for a year because he needed more money, and he didn't ask me first. A year later, he came back and said, I want to go back to school. And I said, you can't.
就是我可以给你讲一个例子，有一个学生真的他人导是挺好的，可是他有一年就突然决定自己应该去工作，因为他没有多少钱，结果他也没有跟我讲，结果自己就跑去工作了。1年之后他回来，他说我想读书，然后我就跟他讲不可能，现在。
So he went home. He was from a country in Africa, and they told him, you can't go back to the U.S. until 10 years has passed.
结果他就回到非洲，这个是他的家乡。结果他想重新再回来，人家告诉他必须10年之后他才能再回来。
So you want to be sure you know about your documents and manage them so that you can do well and prosper.
你一定要知道你自己的这些证件，所以你就可以能够好好的管理，也就特别小心，这样你就可以在美国生活得好。
Okay, we talked a little bit about you're allowed to work on campus jobs, something like practical training or an internship. If someone has very severe needs, that something happened, that the person who was paying for their studies no longer was able to pay, something unexpected happened, sometimes I can help.
这个你工作的可能性就是按这个学生签证工作，一个是在校园工作，再一个也就是你在跟你学业有关的这些 这些训练，比如说你要是做实习等等。还有一个可能性呢，当你就突然有一些你无法预料的经济上的大的困难，比如说有人替你付钱让你来读书的，他突然出现了很大的问题，你可以来跟我讲，我可以帮助。
And in any case, when you do have a job, you need an authorization, and that usually comes from my office.
你要在任何情况下，你要想工作，你必须得有一个来授权的这样的情况，这基本上是从我的办公室里面给。
So I have a business student who has a job as an internship in a company. I can give them authorization to work because this is an internship.
我有一个学商的学生，他可以在一个公司里边，他去工作，我呢就可以给他机会让他去，因为这个中间是他训练的一部分。
But there are limits. They say you are here to study, so they don't want you to work too many hours or you won't be able to study. So they say no more than 20 hours.
中间是有限度，他们说你来这边是为了读书，所以不能够花太多时间工作，所以基本上一个礼拜也就不能超过20个小时。
So if you're here for the summer, you don't need too much. It's a short time.
如果你只是夏天是待在这边，你就不需要太多的东西，因为你们时间很
But
短。
if you come back to study in a university in the U.S. in the future, here are some things you need to know.
如果你将来还会在美国的哪所大学读书，这是有些你应该知道的事情。
You need to see the Office of International Student Services. On this campus, that's me.
你要去你学校里边那种专门为外国学生来服务的这样的办公室。
So wherever that office is at the university that you go to, these are the things you need to see that office about.
就是说，这下面这些所有的事情，就是当你要做下面的事情的时候，你就一定要到外国学生服务中心这个地方去。
If you travel, because I need to check your visa, if you need to renew your visa, I need to give you papers, and I usually give you a letter to come back.
如果你要想旅游，出国旅游，那你要过来找我，我要看你需要什么样的证件。如果你要重新回到美国，我需要给你适当的证件。
And I have to sign your DS 2019. There's things I need to do to give you permission to travel.
我还要给你在你的 DS 2019那个表上我要签名，因为这样你才能够出去旅游。
If you find that you need to drop a class because you said you're in your first year and you accidentally signed up for a class that is for the seniors, then you need to talk to me because we need to work something out.
如果你要觉得你好像有一门课你想退掉，你不想接着修，比如说你要是你刚刚来读书，你选了一门是很高年级的课，你没有办法修，但是你不要随随便便把它退掉，你先要来找我。
The same thing happens to somebody gets very sick and they have to drop out of class. Sometimes I can help. There are things I can do to help someone who's having a very real situation.
或者有人病了，这病得特别严重，如果你需要帮助，需要把一门课要退掉，你就要来找我。
If you need one more semester, you decided to change your major and now you need new courses, I can help you with that.
如果你换了专业，你需要更多一个学期，那你可以来找我，因为你要来找我。
If you're signing up for an internship, I need to give you work authorization.
如果你要打算实习，我要给你做一个签个名，所以你可以去工作。
If you decide to transfer to another school, if you change your address, or if family members come with you, that's usually married couples.
如果你要是想到另外一个学校，或者说你要想改地址，或者说你要想把自己的亲人带过来，让他来，一般是结婚的，可能想让太太先生过来，你都要来办公室，来这个国际学生办公室。
So it's good to know these things if you come on a student visa for a long period of time. Your best friend is going to be the Office of International Student Services.
所以你要是在美国待的时间久啊，你要做学生，你的最好的朋友就是应该是国际学生办公室里面的人。
Okay, I'm going to take just a minute to explain something about the U.S. culture that you might find different than your culture.
我花一点时间想谈一谈美国的文化，你可能觉得有一点不一样。
I don't believe this is in your packet, but what I'm going to give you is from this book.
你们那个里边可能不会有这个东西，但是我会给你一些东西是从一本书里面出来的。
Okay. You will find that Americans have a different idea about time
你会觉得
than what other countries might do.
美国可能跟其他国家的对于时间的观念不太一样。
So if you were supposed to see your professor at 4 o'clock and it's now 5 minutes late,
如果你要想跟你的教授有约，说是4点钟见
what
面
would，your professor think?
可现在是5点钟，现在晚了5分钟，你想想你的教授会怎么想？
The professor would say that's a lack of respect.
这教授就会觉得，那你对他不尊重。
So they consider time to be important. You need to be on time when you make an appointment.
他们觉得时间非常的重要，如果你已经有约定好，这个你就一定要准时到。
You will hear Americans say things like, time is money.
你会听到美国人说，时间就是金钱，
Be on time.
一定要按时，
One thing at a time.
要一样按的时间做。
Work first, play later.
首先工作，然后再能去玩，
Respect the time of others.
所以要尊重别人的时间。
So time is considered a resource much like money.
这个时间就好像金钱一样，作为一种资源。
So you may find that in the American culture.
你会发现美国的文化在这方面很重视。
Americans may have a different way of communicating than what you know as well.
美国人交流的方法也不太一样，可能。
For example, making eye contact.
比如说，他是一定要眼睛一定要对
If
着。
you're talking to your professor, should you look him in the eye?
如果你要是跟你的教授谈话，你要看着他的眼睛。
I had a student once who every time he came to see me, he would look down. And I knew, because I work with international people, I knew he was giving me respect by looking down. But if the professor doesn't know that, they would wonder, why aren't you looking at me in the eye?
就我有一个学生，他每次来跟我谈话的时候，眼睛总是看着地上。那我呢，是因为知道外国学生有的时候，当他们眼睛不看你的时候，眼睛往下看，他是对你表示一种尊重，他不看你的眼睛。可是呢，对于美国教授来说，你如果不看他眼睛，你眼睛总往下看，他就会觉得特别奇怪，你为什么不看着我？
So Americans think if you look in the eye, that's a sign that you're speaking honestly, that you respect them, that you're willing to listen.
美国人是当你看着他的眼睛讲话的时候，他就会认为你很诚实，你也很尊重，你还会很认真的听他讲话。
You will find other things, body language, how close do you stand to someone, things like that might be different in different cultures.
你可能也会发现，在不同的文化之中，大家还有其他的不一样，比如说身体上的这种身体动作的语言，还有大家究竟站得有多近，有多远，都会有不一样。
The best way to learn is watch how the Americans do it.
也最好学习的办法就看美国人之间他们怎么弄。
Social status, what makes a person important?
然后就是说社会地位，到底什么使得一个人有社会地位比较重要？
In some countries, just by being older, you're respected as more important because of your age.
在有些国家呢，只要你年龄大一点，你呢就自然就会被人尊重，因为你的年纪。
Here in the US, it's more important